Adopted. Accordingly, under the rule, the committee rises.
All right. Mr. Chairman, read that.
Mr. Speaker, the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union has had under consideration H.R. 658. And pursuant to House Resolution 189, I report the bill back to the House with an amendment adopted in the Committee of the Whole.
The Committee of the Whole House of the State of the Union reports that the committee has had under consideration the bill H.R. 658 and pursuant to House Resolution 189 reports the bill back to the House with an amendment adopted in the Committee of the Whole. Under the rule, the previous question is ordered. Is there a separate vote demanded on any amendment to the amendment reported from the Committee of the Whole? If not, the question is an adoption of the amendment in the nature of a substitute is amended. Those in favor will say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. The question is on engrossment and third reading of the bill. Those in favor will say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. Third reading.
A bill to amend Title 49 United States Code to authorize appropriations for the Federal Aviation Administration for fiscal years 2011 through 2014 to streamline programs, create efficiencies, reduce waste, and improve aviation safety and capacity, provide stable funding for the national aviation system and for other purposes.
Speaker. Mr. Speaker.
For what purpose does the gentlelady from California seek recognition?
I have a motion to recommit at the desk, Mr. Speaker.
The gentlelady opposed to the bill.
In its present form, I am opposed.
The gentlelady qualifies. The clerk will report the motion.
Ms. Loretta Sanchez of California moves to recommit the bill H.R. 658 to the Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure with instructions to report the same back to the House forthwith with the following amendment.
Is there objection to dispensing with a motion to read the amendment? For what purpose does the gentleman from Minnesota seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I reserve a point of order.
Point of order is reserved. Is there objection to dispensing with the reading? Seeing none, the gentlelady from California is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, the House is not in order.
The gentlelady is correct.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr.
Gentlelady
Speaker,
will suspend. Gentlelady may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this country is in an unprecedented time with growing threats abroad and intense partisan rancor here in this chamber. But at this time and at this moment, Mr. Speaker, my final amendment to the FAA authorization offers an opportunity to bridge these divides and to help add one more component to secure our homeland. I want my colleagues to remember our darkest moment, our very vulnerable moment, the morning of September 11th. I know how vulnerable I felt that day, with the uncertainty of not knowing where the next plane would hit. Would it be our Capitol? Would it be the Golden Gate Bridge? Would it be the Sears Tower? And I also remember the eeriness of 4 or 5 days with no planes in the sky. The uncertainty we all felt. From Richard Reed trying to light a bomb on his shoes to the Christmas Day bombing just 2 years
Speaker,
ago.
the House is not in order. The gentleman's correct. The House will be in order. Gentlelady may proceed.
To the Christmas Day bombing attempt 2 years ago, our skies have long been a target for terrorists. This final amendment to the FAA reauthorization would ensure that federal air marshals are deployed on all high-risk flights for the U.S.
The House is not in order.
Gentlelady will suspend. Will the House please be in order? Gentlelady may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This final amendment to the FAA authorization would ensure that federal air marshals are deployed on all high-level risk flights for U.S. airlines. For the last 20 years, our greatest threats from al-Qaeda and other terrorist organizations have systematically targeted our passenger airlines. The fact that only a percentage of the highest risk passenger flights on U.S. airlines have a federal air marshal shows the amount of work that we still need to do. If the recent attempted attacks I spoke about earlier haven't changed your mind,
Gentlelady may proceed.
if the recent attempted attacks I spoke about earlier haven't changed your mind, then let me remind you about the instability in the Middle East we face right now. The Christmas Day bomber received his training in Yemen, a country now marred with protests that has the potential to become even more unstable and more difficult. Do we want more Christmas Day bombings? I don't believe so. As we are now all aware, our country is engaged in combat operations over the skies of Libya. No one doubts that Colonel Gaddafi's days are numbered, and we will all be better off when there is one less dictator in this world. Some of the younger members in this chamber today may not remember, but Colonel Gaddafi has a history of attacking the United States. 22 years ago, Pan Am Flight 103 took off from London en route to New York when a bomb exploded and it killed 270 people. 189 of those were Americans. I believe we don't need another attack like that. Not now and not ever. My colleagues, I urge you to join me in voting for my amendment to this bill and to ensure that we have more federal air marshals on the highest risk flights. This issue has no aisle. It has no lines. There are no party lines about this. This is what we should do together. Mr. Speaker, as a senior member of the Homeland Security Committee, I have dedicated most of my years in this Congress to ensure that we protect our borders, that we protect our airspace, and that we prevent attacks like this one. Mr. Speaker, I'm here today to make sure that we fulfill that dedication that I know all of my colleagues in this chamber have. I ask my Republican colleagues to support this amendment that will ensure that we have federal air marshals on high-risk flights. When we end our time here in the People's House, when we look back and we ask, what did we do? When we ask ourselves, what was our purpose? I would like to be able to say, we came together and we protected the American people. It's our solemn obligation in this Congress to do all that we can to defend our country. We owe it to those that we represent. We owe it to those on Pan Am Flight 103, and we owe it to those on the attacks of September 11th. Especially, we owe it to the 26,000 passengers who fly our American skies every day. I ask my colleagues on the other side to vote for what is right. Do what is right. We must protect these countries' skies.
Time of the gentlelady has expired.
And no one else will do it. Thank you, and I yield back.
Gentlelady's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Minnesota seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I withdraw my reservation.
The gentleman's reservation is withdrawn.
Mr. Speaker, I vote against this as proposed. This is nothing more than
recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is basically a procedural tactic, and I am very opposed to this. I'm a federal flight deck officer. I have served as a federal flight deck officer flying for the airlines. And if this was truly an important issue, this has been an open process. This would have been brought out way before this time. Furthermore, the Secretary of Transportation has no authority over U.S. air marshals. The FAA is currently operating under 18 extensions, Mr. Speaker. It is time to get this done. We've come here to make a difference and not to recommit. This is an extension that has not been formally reauthorized since 2003, and I suggest that I urge my colleagues to vote for this so that we can get the FAA underway and get transportation and business flying again. The House Republicans have brought a bill here today that reforms the necessary programs It protects air safety and saves the taxpayer dollars. Aviation accounts for 9.3% of our GDP. It's done. 4 years of delays, 4 years of people losing their jobs. You get people back to work and stop these delays. Vote against the MTR, and I would reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman cannot reserve his time. Does the gentleman yield back?
I yield back then, sir.
The gentleman yields back the balance of his time, all time having expired. Without objection, the previous question is ordered, and the questions on the motion recommit. Those in favor will signify so by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it.
Mr. Speaker,
What purpose does the gentlelady seek recognition?
I request the yeas and the nays, please.
Nays and yeas are requested. Those favoring the votes for the yeas and nays will rise. A sufficient number having arisen, the yeas and nays and orders are ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. Pursuant to Clause 8 and Clause 9 of Rule 20, the 15-minute vote on the motion to recommit will be followed by a 5-minute vote on passage of the bill if ordered, ordering the previous question or on House Resolution 194 and adoption of House Resolution 194 if ordered. This will be a 15-minute vote.
The House finishing up work on the 4-year FAA reauthorization. Loretta Sanchez of California with a motion to recommit dealing with calling for federal air marshals on high-risk flights. A 15-minute vote on this motion to recommit, and then final passage vote coming up. On an amendment that they just defeated. The Hill writes about that they rejected a controversial amendment to the FAA bill that would have made it easier to form air and rail unions. Failure to pass that amendment will make it much harder to win Senate passage of the FAA bill and sets up a likely veto even if the Senate were to approve it. Peter Kasperwitz of the Hill writing the amendment from Steve LaTourette would have allowed a National Mediation Board decision from 2010 to stand. That decision allowed unions to be formed based only on the votes of voting workers. Prior to last year's change, non-voting workers were counted as no votes. But the FAA bill, as it stands here in the House, repeals the NMB decision. Well, the jobless rate came out for the month of March earlier today, now at its lowest point in 2 years. The economy added 216,000 new jobs last month, and the unemployment rate fell to 8.8%. We'll likely hear more about that from President Obama. He's speaking today about alternative fuels, alternative vehicles. He's out at a UPS plant in suburban Maryland, and we will cover those comments from the President. That'll be on our companion network, C-SPAN 3. In just a couple of minutes. He's set to speak at about 12:20. This is the motion to recommit vote ahead of final passage on the 4-year FAA reauthorization bill. This is a 15-minute vote on the House floor, final passage after that. And following that, a couple of procedural votes on a bill that is being called the Government Shutdown Prevention Act. It is a week from today that the current short-term spending measure for fiscal year 2011 will expire. There's been talk of the $33 billion compromise figure. The Washington Post writes about that today, saying it would cut $33 billion. The figure being talked about would cut $33 billion from the federal budget. They write that the government's now been operating without a budget for 183 days. And they say that late yesterday afternoon, Speaker Boehner held his regular meeting with the 87 freshmen in the Capitol basement. Representative Patrick Meehan, whose suburban Philadelphia district is one of the most moderate, held by a GOP freshman, said there was a, quote, sense of shared conviction, end quote, that the Democratic-held Senate is the problem. Speaker Boehner will be speaking to reporters probably in a half an hour or so, and we will have a camera crew over there and show you his comments later in our program schedule. John Harwood tweets from CNBC saying that shutting down the government would hurt Republicans politically. Shutting down government over an abortion rider would hurt more. Boehner will try hard to avoid. And keep in mind, you can keep track of the congressional media and members of Congress who tweet at twitter.com/C-SPAN. Pick one of the lists there, including the members of Congress list, to find out some of the latest things being talked about on Capitol Hill. The House is voting on the motion to recommit related to the FAA reauthorization bill, a 4-year authorization. The Senate version's 2 years, so obviously some differences, that among several, to be worked out between the two in a likely conference on the FAA bill. Final passage vote will follow here momentarily on the House floor. And ahead, more debate on fiscal year 2011 spending in and around the discussion on what's being called the Government Shutdown Prevention Act. This morning, the Associated Press is reporting that the leader of the Senate, Harry Reid, vows that any compromise on a government-wide spending bill won't include any GOP proposals blocking the Environmental Protection Agency from enforcing new regulations on greenhouse gases. Harry Reid told reporters that neither the White House nor Senate Democrats are, quote, going to accept any EPA riders, and he was referring to a raft of Republican policy provisions catching a ride, writes the Associated Press, on a House-passed government-wide funding bill currently being negotiated in hopes of avoiding a government shutdown next weekend. Remember, the current short-term spending bill expires a week from today. Final passage vote coming up on the FAA reauthorization bill. That'll be a 5-minute vote. And the House version of the bill reauthorizes FAA policies and programs for 4 years. In political news, Rick Santorum said today that he's going to participate in the first debate of the presidential campaign. This is the one organized by Fox News and the South Carolina Republican Party. The so-called First in the South presidential debate will be held in downtown Greenville, South Carolina, at the Peace Center for Performing Arts. On the road to the White House this Sunday, comments from Mitt Romney, also from Rand Paul, Sunday at 6:30 and 9:30 Eastern and Pacific.
The nays are 235. The motion is not adopted. The question is on passage of the bill. Those in favor will say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. Gentleman from Illinois.
Mr. Speaker, on that I ask for the yeas and nays.
A recorded vote has been requested. Those favoring a recorded vote will rise. A sufficient number having arisen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic devices. Will be a 5-minute vote.
And this is final passage of H.R. 658. This is the FAA reauthorization bill.
On this vote, the yeas are 223, the nays are 196, and the bill is passed. And without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid upon the table. The unfinished business is the vote on ordering the previous question on House Resolution 194, on which the yeas and nays are ordered. The clerk will report the title of the resolution.
House Calendar Number 24, House Resolution 194. Resolution providing for consideration of the bill, H.R. 1255, to prevent a shutdown of the government of the United States and for other purposes.
The question is on ordering the previous question. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 5-minute vote.
Two more votes here, and then on to likely debate, more debate on fiscal year 2011 spending. What's coming up is the vote on the rule for what's being called the Government Shutdown Prevention Act, H.R. 1255, a bill that would attempt to pass H.R. 1, the Republican spending bill that passed in February for fiscal year 2011, would attempt to pass that into law should the Senate not approve any 2011 spending bill by next Wednesday. It would also, this bill to be considered, would prevent members of Congress from being paid, and the President as well during a potential government shutdown, which would be a week away if there's no agreement, because the current temporary spending bill would expire a week from today. And on that note, Sam Stein of Huffington Post writes that some progressive and labor leaders are saying they will fast beginning this weekend in a late-stage effort to call attention to the inequity of sharp cuts being considered in congressional budget negotiations. He writes the heads of MoveOn.org, the Service Employees International Union, Center for Community Change, Green for All, and a number of other groups would join a fast started earlier this week by religious activists to spotlight perceived injustices in the proposed federal budget cuts. This is Huffington Post's Sam Stein writing that several of the leaders are planning to fast through Monday of next week, meaning that budget negotiations will probably outlast the fasting. Others, however, have vowed to go on for weeks, and the groups are asking their members to join in an ongoing basis. The underlying goal in the end is not necessarily to derail negotiations, he writes, which have centered around roughly $33 billion in cuts from current spending levels, but rather to influence what types of programs end up on the chopping blocks. So what's ahead? Final passage vote, or excuse me, the rule vote for the Government Shutdown Act, what's being called the Government Shutdown Prevention Act. That's ahead.
On this vote, the yeas are 230, the nays are 187. The previous question is ordered. The question is on adoption of the resolution. All those in favor signify so by saying aye. Those opposed, nay. The opinion of the chair, the ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman from Florida.
Mr. Speaker, on that I ask the yeas and nays.
A recorded vote is ordered. Those favoring a recorded vote will rise. A sufficient number having arisen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 5-minute vote.
The House is voting on the rule for what's being called the Government Shutdown Prevention Act. This is a 5-minute vote. The rule would allow for an hour of general debate. The underlying purpose of this bill, this bill would it would take the approved budget that was passed by the House last month, H.R. 1, the $61 billion in cuts. The bill says this would become law if the Senate fails to act by next Wednesday. The only problem with that plan, to some degree, is that nothing is going to happen on this is H.R. 1255, the Government Prevention Act. Nothing's going to happen if it's only taken up by the House. So this is a House bill, and if which would say that their bill, H.R. 1, would become law if the House and Senate, if the Senate and President don't do anything by next Wednesday. But the conundrum is that obviously the Senate would have to take it up. The President would have to sign it for it to become legislation. This is the vote on the rule for that, so we'll have an hour of general debate should the rule pass here. Good, somewhat better economy news today with the jobless figures coming out today for the month of March. Jobless rate dropping to 8.8%, down to its lowest in 2 years as the economy adds 216,000 jobs to the payrolls. President Obama speaking in Landover, Maryland at this hour, live on our companion network C-SPAN 2, the President remarking about the jobless figures, saying, quote, there is real sign of strength, but he does say that there are still millions looking for work. Again, the President speaking now at this hour, and you can follow that on C-SPAN 2, and we will show it to you later in our program schedule, too.
129, the yeas are 187. The resolution is adopted, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid upon the table. For what purpose does the gentleman from Virginia seek recognition? Georgia.
Pursuant to House Resolution 194, I call up the bill H.R. 1255 and ask for its consideration.
Clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 1255, a bill to prevent a shutdown of the government of the United States and for other purposes.
Pursuant to House Resolution 194, the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Woodall, and the gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Clyburn, each will control 30 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Georgia.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 1 minute to my leader, the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Cantor.
Gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
I thank the Speaker. I thank the gentleman from Georgia. Mr. Speaker, the House is not in order.
Gentleman is correct. Gentleman may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as we debate the future course of government spending, we need to be honest with the people of this country about the current fiscal state of affairs. America averages now trillion-dollar deficits. We borrow nearly 40 cents of every dollar we spend. Given the fiscal cloud that hangs over our country, it is reckless to assume we can live pain-free forever. Sooner or later, something has to give. To give families and business confidence that their future won't be plagued by inflation, higher taxes, and higher interest rates, our majority vowed to move forcefully to cut spending. Mr. Speaker, the House is not in order.
Gentleman is correct. Gentleman may proceed.
We made clear that only by putting federal spending on a sustainable trajectory could we create the conditions necessary for growth and job creation. During our 3 months in the majority, we have delivered on our promise. 6 weeks ago, after 47 hours of debate, we passed H.R. 1 to fund the government for the remainder of the fiscal year and save taxpayers $61 billion relative to current spending. In a more open process than the House had seen in 4 years, we allowed the other party to offer countless amendments. And over the past month, we've passed 2 continuing resolutions that have cut $10 billion in spending. All along, Mr. Speaker, we practically begged President Obama and Senate Democrats to get serious and come to the table with a legitimate proposal. But we got nothing in return. No legislation, no credible plan to cut spending. Mr. Speaker, I want to underline the fact that we do not want a government shutdown. Yet as Senate Democrats refuse to pass a bill, that unsettling prospect now looms ever larger, which is why they must act. Today, we are bringing a bill to the floor that makes clear that continued inaction on the part of the Senate Democratic majority is simply unacceptable. Finally, this bill also ensures that going forward, should there ever be a government shutdown, that members of Congress and the President will not get paid. If we can't do our job, why should we get paid? Mr. Speaker, funding the government at the levels passed by House Republicans might not be what Senator Reid wants, but surely even he would agree that it's a better alternative than shutting down the government. I urge my colleagues to support this bill, and I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. Gentleman from South Carolina.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, to begin this debate, I yield 4 minutes to the distinguished Democratic leader.
Gentleman from Maryland is recognized for 4 minutes.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. April Fools, America. This is a joke, America. This is not real, America. As a matter of fact, Mr. Woodall of Georgia says it's not real. It's not going to pass the Senate. He made that very clear. The majority leader just said, if the Senate won't take what we give them, we're going to shut down the government. That's what he just said. And that's what I believe to be the case. The last time the government shut down was not when we had a Republican president and a Democratic Congress, but when we had a Democratic president and a Republican Congress. They shut down the government in 1995 and 1996. They shut down the government over Christmas, as a matter of fact. The Grinch, who stole the government's operations for almost 3 weeks. We're about to do it again. Mr. Woodall, who has been here now a few months, was 10 years old when I came to the Congress of the United States. He mentioned something about the debt, this $14 trillion of debt. Well, I've only been here, I tell my friend, 30 years. But during the course of those 30 years, Republican presidents have signed bills spending $4.8 trillion in deficit spending. During the course of the Clinton administration, we had a surplus, as the gentleman probably knows. Now, he will say, presumably because we had a Republican Congress. But, of course, the Republicans not only took the Congress, but they took the presidency in 2001, and they ran up $2.5 trillion of deficit and increased the national debt by 115%, notwithstanding the fact that they inherited a projected $5.6 trillion surplus. And now they passed this April Fool's joke on America that the gentleman who's one of the co-sponsors says won't pass the Senate. We know it won't pass the Senate. But they pretend in their language what is clearly contrary to the Constitution. Because they say if it doesn't pass, the provisions of H.R. 1, the bill they've sent to the Senate, passed by the House on February 19, 2011, are hereby enacted into law. In other words, we're going to deem it passed. Let me tell you what Eric Cantor said about deeming it passed. Malfeasant manner. Did not discharge the duties of their office. Then Speaker Boehner said this about these deeming pieces of legislation, which this is. He said it was a scheme and plot that set a precedent that was, quote, one of the most outrageous things that he had seen since he had been in Congress, and erroneously claimed that it never happened in American history. In fact, it had happened before. This has never happened, where the House of Representatives took the position, if you don't pass what we want, ours goes into law anyway. I'm sure our Tea Party friends are shocked, because they will find nowhere in the Constitution, my friends, does that provide for. Furthermore, Mike Pence said the procedure like this, he said, denounced deem and pass as, quote, trampling on the traditional rules of the House and the Senate, and even on the Constitution of the United States of America. Michelle Bachmann, apparently maybe a candidate for president, said this, that deem and pass, quote, ignored the Constitution and warranted the impeachment of the House Speaker. Quote, there should be people that are calling for impeachment off of something like this. This resolution. Can I have additional 1 minute?
We yield the gentleman additional 1 minute.
I thank the gentleman for 1 minute. Something like this, which says, contrary to the Constitution, if the Senate doesn't act, this bill becomes law. Nobody on your side surely believes that that can happen. Nobody believes that that joke that we're trying to play on the American people on April Fool's Day will be believed by any of them. And my friends, do not tell me about your concern about the deficit, because the deficit during my period of time, except for the last 2 years trying to deal with the deep depression in which the last administration left this economy, don't try to tell me that we're responsible for the debt, the $14 trillion of debt. Surely my friend knows that's not the case. And if my friend doesn't know it, I would be glad to set up a time when we can debate that issue in any forum he chooses, because the facts belie his representation. My friends, reject this bill. Reject this bill because it is a fraud on the American public. Reject this bill because it's an attempt to shift blame from the House of Representatives passing a bill that can, in fact, pass. Not to say to the Senate, our way or no way, and we will shut down the government, because that's what this bill says, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Georgia.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself 15 seconds to say to my friend from Virginia, about whom I say regularly back home has a reputation for... I'm sorry, Maryland. We've got Virginia on our mind today. Pardon me, Mr. Hoyer. My friend from Maryland.
No, Virginia's a good state.
For whom
right.
I tell folks back home regularly has a great reputation for fair dealings and honest operations here in the House. Tremendously disappointed by that characterization of the bill, and I'd like to yield 5 minutes to the bill's sponsor to set the record straight on what the bill actually does.
I thank you for his observation and regret that he thought it was a mischaracterization, because I thought it was accurate. Thank you very much.
Gentleman from Arkansas is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thanks to the gentleman for yielding. Yes, there's been a lot of conversation in Washington about the prospect of a government shutdown. And while I realize there are some in this Congress who might prefer that option, I am not one of them. And let me just add, our leader is not one of them. Frankly, we think it's irresponsible. Our constituents did not send us to Washington to shut down the government. They sent us here to make it more accountable to the people. And that's precisely what House Republicans have been doing. Examine the facts. When the curtain came up on this Congress, we were already 3 months into this fiscal year with no budget, and on a temporary spending plan through early March. This House went to work crafting legislation that would fund government for the rest of this fiscal year while delivering on our pledge to cut spending. The response from the Senate, not so fast. So we kept government operational with a 2-week continuing resolution in hopes that the Senate would realize the sense of urgency that accompanies our fiscal situation. And in that 2-week span of time, the response, not interested. Again, this House went to work crafting another temporary measure that funds government through next week. And my friends, patience is wearing thin, not just my patience and the patience of my colleagues, but the patience of Americans. In our collective opinion, time's up. Mr. Speaker, we all agree that we have some bigger fish to fry. Pressures on the statutory limit on debt, and more importantly, the 2012 budget loom very large right now for this country. And instead of focusing on these issues critical to our struggling economy, here we are, mired in partisan gamesmanship over funding the government for the remainder of this year. Did we come here to fish, or did we come here to cut bait? This bill simply puts the clock in action on this process. I am hopeful my colleagues will agree that the time is now to move beyond 2011 so that we can turn our attention to the bigger challenges of transforming this institution and restoring fiscal sanity. That's what the people sent us here to do, and every day we fail to do this work, the people lose. We've been called extreme. H.R. 1, which passed in the early morning hours on this floor on February the 19th, cuts on an annualized basis $100 billion in federal spending. That's 1/16 of the deficit. 1/16. Is that extreme? I don't think so. Mr. Speaker, it's unfortunate that people across America trying to find jobs, trying to pay their mortgages, and trying to have the funds to put their kids through college are victimized by this flawed political process. Instead of removing the uncertainty for small business and job creators by cutting spending and shrinking the size and reach of government, we're playing games with the future of our nation. If this is our best falls short of the expectation of those we represent. We can do better. We should do better. And if all we can show for our work is a shutdown of the government, we will have failed our constituency and should not be paid. The gamesmanship going on right now is gambling with America's future. And it's hard to make progress when you're playing on House money. H.R. 1255 forces members to have skin in the game. And if passed by both chambers and signed by the President, we'll have the proper motivation to set aside the rhetoric and actually accomplish something that is good for America, a climate for job creation, not a government shutdown. I urge my colleagues to support this bill so we can do the people's work, and I yield back.
The gentleman from South Carolina.